What is primary sources? Primary sources convey first-hand experience of the event or time period you're studying. They are the most direct evidence of a time or event because they were created by people or things that we were at the time or event. These sources have not been modified by interpretation and offer original thought or new information. Primary sources are original materials regardless of format, a person's account of own feelings, action, or experiences, object or document that comes directly from person, place, or event being researched. Primary sources were made by during the historical period that is being investigated. These are often the hardest to find but as a result are often the strongest evidence you can use in your assessment pieces.
This is the example of primary sources. At the home of 19th century American documentary history, a continuation of that draws upon of the Ben's manual, particular design of personal accounts of popular fiction, algorithm design image, reform territory to represent a reality of less Americans called home. Next, the voice of evil in 19th century Cuba, Major AC by the author introduced the world in second part of book of pictures of 18 rebellious unforeseeable primary documents to which the of experience of Cuban's African selves.
What is secondary source? Secondary source convey the experience of others or second-hand information they obtain synthesize a collection of primary source. Secondary source usually use primary source and offer interpretation, analysis, or commentary. This resource obtain present primary source information which the addition of hindsight or historical perspective. Secondary sources were made after the time period you are investigating. As you progress as a history student, you will start to find that some secondary sources are better than others. As a general rule, value secondary sources that are created by scholars, as they are usually more reliable. However, which modern scholar aim to produce reliable and unbased historical accounts, read their retaining which the same critical eye as you would primary source.
This is the example of secondary sources. 500 years of China women's and 500 años de la Chicana. 500 years of Chicana women's history offers a powerful antidote of the absent Chicana history in U.S. history books. The books is a vivid pictorial account of struggle, survival, resilience, and achievement, discrimination, and identity. Next, material of coast breweries, from antique bottles to closely guarded recipes and treasured historic architecture. Breweries have a special place in American history. The fascinating books bring the materials, culture, breweries in the United States to life for many regions of the country, from early 16th century production to today's industrial operations.
When can a source be primary and secondary? Whether something is a primary or secondary source often depends upon the topic and its use. A biology textbook would be considered a secondary source if in the field of biology, since it describes and interprets the science but makes no original contribution to it. On the other end, if the topic is science education in the history of textbooks could be used a primary source to look at how they have changed over time. The explanation of secondary source can become a primary source depending on your research question. If the person, context, or technique that produce the source is the main focus of your research, it becomes a primary source.
Another example of primary source, diaries. A diaries is a primary source if it was written during the period of time you're studying. For example, a diary written by Benjamin Franklin will be useful in drawing accurate conclusions about what he did or who he saw on a daily basis during his life. However, a diary written by his great granddaughter that describe his daily life and visitors most likely would not be considered a primary source for this type of information. Next, letter. Letter from the Civil War are primary source. Letter are first handwritten record of event and communication between people. So they count as primary source. Generally speaking, letters are used as historical evidence or evidence in legal cases. Letters are written records of event and communication between people, so any information contained within is evidence of an event or interaction which happened.
Artwork, like painting created by a person who witnesses an event. If the painting originated at the time it depicts, then it is a primary source. For instance, Da Vinci's Mona Lisa is a primary source because it is the most famous art piece during the Renaissance period. Works of art, in general, are considered primary sources. Yes, a painting is a primary source since it provides an idea of what something might have looked like at the time that the painter lived. This is the another example of secondary sources. Biography. A biography is a secondary sources because it collects and interprets primary sources. Even biographies that were written at the time are not a direct account, though the gray area is larger on those cases.
Textbooks are secondary sources since they try to boil down evidence from primary documents from history and present them in a way for a student to find major themes or lessons. A biology textbook would be considered a secondary source if in the field of biology, since it describes and interprets the science but makes no original contribution to it. Websites. You can also find some journal articles and secondary sources on websites. However, not all websites are trustworthy and worthy of citation in your academic work. Be sure to consider who is responsible for a website, when and where it was created and updated, and for what purpose. Secondary pages are optional for site sections, and they are typically used to dynamically present content on a website. A secondary page can have static content, but what makes secondary pages useful is their ability to have dynamically placed and replaceable content.